Hi, Polly here.
And this is Tortuga.
And this is Trek for Free Stories. Let's dive in.
Today's adventure, The Mountains Don't Forget. Now, enjoy the story. Mystery, adventure, and history.
I saw her from the river. 2015, West Virginia. A whitewater trip through the gorge cut through mountains so old they've forgotten how to be sharp. There she was, a woman in her 90s, a cabin on the bank, no electricity, no phone, no store within reach. The government had told her she could not pass her land on to her children. She could live there until she died, and that was the arrangement. When she was gone, the land would become public land. We floated past in our rubber boats. She watched us from the porch the way you watch traffic on the road that used to be a field. I'm Tortuga. This is Trek for Free, and I have thought about her many times since. I love hiking these mountains, camping in the national forest, running trails that belong to everyone. But somewhere along the way, I started asking a question I couldn't stop asking. Where did this land come from? Not the geological answer, the human one. Who was here before the trail? Whose fence post is that? Whose basement is underneath the foundation I passed 3 miles back? It actually makes me mad when I think about it too long. Not mad at the trail. Not mad at the forest. I'm mad at the story nobody tells, the one about how public land actually became public.
These mountains are older than the country that claimed them. The Cherokee had been here for thousands of years before any European set foot on these ridges. They had names for every gap, every creek, every high point. They had paths through the Blue Ridge that became the roads that became the interstates. They knew where the sang grew, where the silver was, how to winter in these hollows without losing anyone. Then the surveyors came. 1748. George Washington was 16 years old, working for Lord Fairfax, mapping the Virginia frontier. He walked ridges that are now hiking trails. He slept in hollows that are now campgrounds. And at Natural Bridge, a 215-foot limestone arch in the Virginia hills, he did what 16-year-old boys have done since the beginning of time. He carved his initials, 23 feet up the wall. Nobody knows exactly how he got there. The future first president, a teenager with a surveyor's compass and nothing to prove yet. 23 feet up a limestone cliff. Thomas Jefferson bought Natural Bridge from the British Crown in 1774. 20 shillings. He called it the most sublime of nature's works. He built a log cabin there. He wrote about it. The man who wrote that all men are created equal owned a piece of these mountains. Daniel Boone punched the Wilderness Road through the Cumberland Gap in 1775. Same year the Revolution started. Same mountains. Same hollows. Already full of families who had been there for generations, who would be there for generations more, long after the famous men moved on. These same mountains. These exact ridges. Everyone knows about the moonshine. That's the one thing outsiders remember. But the Appalachian Mountains ran on something deeper and older. A whole economy that left almost no paper trail, because paper wasn't the point. Sang. That's what they called ginseng, the slow-growing root that sells for hundreds of dollars a pound today. Mountain people knew exactly where the wild patches grew, the north-facing hollows, the old-growth shade. They didn't tell their neighbors. They didn't tell their children until they were old enough to keep a secret. Locations passed down the way you'd pass down a name. Bee trees, a hollow tree with a wild colony inside. You'd mark it with a cut only your family knew, come back in fall, take the honey, leave enough for the bees to winter. That tree would be there next year and the year after, and you never needed a grocery store. And underneath all of it, barter. A man who could cure a ham, shoe a horse, or doctor a sick cow didn't need cash. He had what the neighbors needed. Trade ran through those communities like a river, invisible to the taxman, invisible to the company store, invisible to anyone who didn't live inside it.
And then there are the secrets nobody talks about at all. These mountains are riddled with caves. Some hold old stills. Some hold canned goods buried deep where the temperature never changes. And some, the old-timers will tell you if they trust you, hold something else. Maps scratched on bark. Locations that only 2 people knew. And one of them is gone.
Swift's Silver Mine. Somewhere in the Kentucky and Virginia hills, a man named Swift found silver in the 1760s. Before Daniel Boone, before the Revolution, before any of it. He drew a map. He buried the evidence. He came back years later and couldn't find it. Or said he couldn't. The mine has never been found. People are still looking. I remember Polly's mom mentioned a cave on their property, something that sounds like it could be related to Swift, or not. What else is in there? I'm dying to know. Let's learn more about Polly and see if we can stitch together the pieces. Polly's great-grandparents were those people. A 2-story farmhouse in the Virginia hills, a full basement of canned goods, chickens, cows, pigs, a big garden. Everything they needed. Built by people who intended to stay. He was tall and lean and bald. She was medium height, with very big hands. He went into the coal mine. She ran the farm. Every morning before dawn, she was already up. Biscuits, jellies, 3 meals a day. Butter churned by hand. A party line telephone their great-granddaughter Polly got in trouble for listening in on, more than once. He brought home coal wages, sometimes in scrip, company money that spent only at the company store, at the company's prices. Money that went back before it could become anything. The farm was his protection against that. A man with a farm has options a man without one doesn't. They were not rich. They were something better than rich. They were independent. Here is the question that took me years to think through clearly. If this family was self-sufficient, if they grew their own food, raised their own animals, preserved their own harvest, how did the government extract anything from them? You cannot pay property taxes in eggs and butter. The barter economy didn't collapse on its own. It was taxed into extinction. Slowly. Quietly. On purpose. That is how it was done. The moment you require cash payment for the right to stay on your own land, you have created a dependency that didn't exist before. Not a cruel law, not a gun at the door, just a tax bill in a currency the farm doesn't produce. The coal companies understood this perfectly. They paid in scrip, money that couldn't leave the company ecosystem. Workers couldn't accumulate real dollars, couldn't build independence. The farm was the only escape hatch, and the farm only worked if you could hold the land. We hear about what the government did to Native Americans. The coal miners don't get the same chapter. But the mechanism was identical. Unlimited resources and lawyers against families without phones, sometimes without the ability to read the documents they were signing. There's one more thing I have to tell you. Polly was 3 or 4 years old the last time she visited the farm with a pacifier. The family wanted her to give it up. She wouldn't. Finally, they talked her into throwing it to the pigs. She did. She immediately regretted it, and cried and cried and cried. Her great-grandfather slaughtered the pig and retrieved the pacifier. That man loved that little girl with everything he had. That is the whole story of these people in one moment.
the lengths a man will go to for the child in front of him. On land his family built with nothing but time and work and the knowledge of how to stay alive in the mountains. There is more we have to learn about these mountain people, how they were able to survive, build, and carve out the nature around them. What happened to their knowledge? Did we lose it all? I know of one place to look, and I can never get enough. Foxfire. In 1966, an English teacher in the North Georgia mountains handed his students tape recorders. He sent them into the hills to talk to their grandparents. They published a magazine, 12 volumes of books. Hog slaughtering, moonshining, faith healing, snake lore, butter churning, everything disappearing without anyone writing it down. They called it Foxfire, named for the fungus that glows on rotting wood in Appalachian darkness. Light that's there if you know to look for it. Gone if you wait too long. Foxfire got enough to prove that what outsiders called poverty was something else entirely. A complete way of knowing how to be alive in a place most people couldn't survive a week in. When I read Foxfire, I can't help but think about that woman I saw from the river. She was probably still living some version of it. Boiling a pig's head to clean every bit of meat off the bone. Putting up jars before the first freeze. Keeping warm the way she always had. Life in those mountains was never easy. It was never meant to be easy. But it was the only life she had ever known. And she knew it completely. In 2015, on a river in West Virginia, the light was still on in one cabin on the bank. She watched us float past. I don't remember if she waved. I remember her cabin, the way it sat on the land like it had grown there. And I remember thinking that whatever she knew about surviving alone in those mountains was going to die with her on that porch. The government had already made sure it couldn't be passed on. Her land is a hiking trail now. You walked on it this weekend. Or you will. It is public land. It belongs to everyone. Which is another way of saying it belongs to no one who ever called it home. The mountains don't forget. That's the Trek for Free way.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Trek for Free Adventure Stories. If this sounds like your kind of expedition, give us a thumbs up, subscribe so you can catch the next one. In the spirit of adventurers of yesteryear and the storytelling legends of Louis L'Amour, I hope we find a place in your travels. See you on the road. Until next time, adios.